Therapy Chat Podcast, episode 331.
This is the Therapy Chat Podcast with Laura Reagan, LCSWC. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC.
Today's episode is sponsored by Trauma Therapist Network. Trauma Therapist Network is a platform for finding a trauma therapist, learning about trauma, and understanding about how trauma shows up in our lives and what the healing process can look like. Go to www.traumatherapistnetwork.com to learn more. This week's episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, the #1 rated electronic health record system available today. With live telephone support 7 days a week, it's clear why TherapyNotes is rated 4.9 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot and has a 5-star rating on Google. TherapyNotes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. And now, for all you prescribers out there, TherapyNotes is proudly introducing ePrescribe. Use coupon code CHAT or click the link in the show notes to get 2 free months at therapynotes.com. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan. Today, we are continuing the conversation about equine-assisted psychotherapy. So if you heard episode 329, I interviewed Mary Sue McCarthy, LCPC, and she talked about trauma-focused equine-assisted psychotherapy, which is a mouthful. Words I use all the time, but just stumble over them when I'm putting them all together. Mary Sue explained how equine-assisted psychotherapy helps us engage the attachment system and how we do equine work because it's an opportunity to activate our attachment relating. So the way we relate to other beings opens up in connection with a horse or doesn't open up. Neither way, it's information. So if you listen to episode 329, you know what I'm talking about. Mary Sue explained it very well. And she also wrote a guest post on Trauma Therapist Network's blog about this subject where she goes into it in a little bit more detail, explaining how it relates to polyvagal theory, but it's all in a very down-to-earth style of explanation, so it's not super heady. Anyway, hopefully you heard episode 329. Last week we heard that interview with Mary Sue McCarthy, and this week you're going to hear me speaking with Julia Alexander, who is now a licensed clinical social worker practicing in Austin, Texas. But at the time, she was a new grad, and she talked about finding her way in clinical work as an equine psychotherapist with her natural lifemanship training. So this is a really interesting conversation to listen to, especially as we're in graduation season and there's many new MSW grads coming out of school now, eager to get out there and help. And there's so much need right now, as always. It's harder and harder to find a therapist these days because so many of us are exhausted and worn out from practicing during the pandemic, walking alongside our clients, dealing with the same struggles and pain and fear that we have been dealing with, which is very challenging. And as the pandemic is shifting to some kind of a strange new normal with plenty of ups and downs, still, many of us are wondering how we're going to keep going. It's a really hard time to be a therapist, but connection and community and being with others who get where you've been and know that it can get better is really powerful. It's been deeply meaningful to me connecting with fellow trauma therapists in the Trauma Therapist Network community during our weekly calls. There's so much resonance in all of our experiences, and there's so much hope and compassion and kindness and warmth and encouragement and support and practical tips. I'm really grateful for the community, and I'm grateful for all of you new social workers and other mental health professionals and counselors who will be out there graduating this summer. And so my advice to all the new grads is practice self-compassion. You have the heart to help others. You're a caring person and you're a resourceful and intelligent person. And you can learn all the ways to help others. One of the things that they don't teach you in school, at least they didn't before, and I hope it's getting better, is how to take care of yourself. So as you go out there and do good work, remember to go inward and check in with your own needs. Hopefully, these conversations on Therapy Chat can remind you to come back home to yourself. I think making your own self-tending a regular practice and a priority is the only way to keep going in this field. And don't try to go it alone. You're not alone. You're part of a community of people, and we can do more together. So congratulations to all the new grads, and I hope this conversation will be inspiring, thought-provoking, and love to have you as part of the Trauma Therapist Network. If you have experience in trauma and training and passion for working with trauma survivors, you are needed. Registration will be opening up this summer, so if you are a therapist and you're interested in that, be sure to get on the waiting list. There's a link in the show notes. Let's dive right in to my conversation with Julia Alexander, who will be returning sometime in the near future for an updated conversation to hear about what she's doing now. Thank you all for listening. Talk to you soon. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. Today's episode is going to be, I think, fascinating. Of course, I always say that, so you can decide for yourself, but I think you're going to enjoy my interview with Julia Alexander. Julia, thank you so much for being on Therapy Chat.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here too, and I'd like to start off with just you letting the audience know a little bit about you, who you are, and your work.
Sure. Okay. So I recently graduated with my MSW from Smith College. I now work out at Spirit Reigns in Liberty Hill, Texas, and I do trauma-focused equine-assisted psychotherapy. And I got involved in that work. It was a long time coming. But when I was at Smith, I went through my first semester of classes, and it was a lot of focus on talk therapy, and I wanted to understand trauma better. And I found a mentor who worked with horses, and I grew up working with horses, and I think everyone that has had childhood experiences with horses, they know that there's something really healing and powerful about that connection that is sometimes hard to put into words, but it's a felt sense. And I thought if I could figure out how to do that, I would be really happy in the work that I was doing. And it would help me understand my own experiences better as well. So anyways, long story short, my mentor sent me training for natural lifemanship. And I felt like I learned more in 3 days about the brain and about trauma and about myself and about connection than I had learned about any of those things within my schooling. So that's what led me to the path that I'm on now.
Awesome. Yeah. So I know that a lot of people who work with horses know that they feel something. And like you said, it's a felt sense. But I think from my experience, a lot of people who work with horses don't know what they're feeling with it and why. So they can't explain it. You know, they don't have like the teaching about, you know, self-regulation and trauma that comes with natural lifemanship. So it's like sort of a missing piece in that. I think in that experience for many people who do work with horses, they're like, I just know that I have to do this, or people will say it's my therapy, but, you know, without like the frame of reference to say what it's doing for them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
People who ride, people who work with horses directly as like, you know, trainers and working in stables and owning stables and things like that. So it's like you can take that knowledge from your own experience of what it felt like. And then when you learn what's really happening in your brain when you're working with horses, it's like, oh.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like. I mean, I think there's two pieces, I feel like, to some of this trauma-informed equine-assisted psychotherapy that were really big paradigm shifts for me. And the first is exactly what you're saying, is that, yes, there's this felt sense of being near horses, being around them, building relationships with them, and then being on them. And all of those things, once we start to understand trauma and how it impacts the brain and how regulation happens and, what we need to support our own regulation, our clients' regulation, it's like, wow, this really just makes sense. And then if we move to have clients on the horse, I think it's very hard to repeat that or copy that natural movement of the horse. And so you have these things happening that, as a horse person, you go and you're just like, wow, this is exactly what I've been feeling. But there's another piece to that, that's a big paradigm shift, I think, which is, I think that we're taught, many of us who have had horse experience, we're taught that we are in control of the horse and that, we can't show our fear. And there's all these stories, I think, that at least I was told growing up.
I've heard those things.
Yeah.
You have to act confident. You have to make the horse think you're not afraid.
Yes.
And
yes,
the horse needs you to be in control.
Yes, exactly. And what I love about natural lifemanship is that it really flips that mentality on its head. And, it talks about, as a principle-based model, that we're not going to engage with horses in a way that we wouldn't want to engage with clients. So it's not about control. It's not about dominance. It's about connection, and it's about building a relationship where both parties can think and act for themselves, where both parties keep themselves safe and, make requests that don't damage relationships. And as we know with trauma, right, that, when we're dysregulated or when we're triggered, we can make decisions, or I guess it's not even decisions. We can react in ways that damage relationships. And so I think the healing, that comes in is rewiring the brain to develop different relationship patterns. And the horse, they're just so incredible at helping us to do that. So yeah, a lot of really amazing connections made once we understand the brain and once we look at horses as partners in this process and not as tools.
Beautiful. Yeah. I want to ask you about one thing you said, but first I want to comment that what strikes me as being really different in natural lifemanship from what, I am not an experienced horsewoman, and people who've listened to this podcast know that I've had more exposure to being around and working with horses and riding over the past couple of years than I hadn't had before since I was, kind of an adolescent. But I think what I have learned in my more recent time around horses, there have been a lot of messages about the horse wants you to be the leader and, you have to show the horse, kind of like that you're in charge and everything. And that's what makes the horse feel safe. And I've seen some things from natural lifemanship that say it's not about making the horse do what you want to do. It's about making a connection with the horse so that the horse wants to do what you're asking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really powerful message to have in relationships. I mean, I think people that have experienced trauma, a lot of us have experiences where relationships are based on, dominance or control or fear or intimidation.
Powerlessness.
Yeah, powerlessness, exactly. Not feeling like you have a voice. And those feelings are our body feeling. Our body feels that and stores that. And I think that with natural lifemanship, we open up our minds to the possibility of experiencing a different type of relationship that doesn't, where the foundation is not those things. And that can feel really scary, I think, especially when you work with such a big animal, and
extremely vulnerable.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable, but that's kind of where the work is, right? I mean, you put yourself in this position to not dominate, right? And to build enough trust where you do make a request out of a relationship and the other party, whether it's a horse or a person, says, absolutely, I want, I want what's best for this relationship. I want to connect with you. And if connection means that, you need me to follow you, then I'm happy to do that, because it doesn't hurt our relationship. It strengthens it. And obviously, I don't think the horse is having that exact conversation in its head, but that's the foundation of.
Well, the horse is kind of having that conversation in its body, just like a lot of what's going on for us. We think it's our thoughts that are, running it, but it's really more responses to what we feel that are happening in our body that make us do what we do, even if we then analyze it with our smart thinking brains, and think that that's the explanation.
And a lot of this work, as we've talked about before, it's body based, it's a felt sense. I mean, and some clients, are not in a position to be able to be really insight oriented. They just need support, feeling, and that's it. And learning what feels safe and what doesn't feel safe, and creating boundaries and all of those things that healthy relationships need.
Yeah. And when you're talking about body oriented work, the sense of feeling safe or unsafe is more in one's body than it is in our conscious, cognitive awareness. And so when sometimes you might ask someone, or you might ask yourself, am I safe? Yeah, of course I'm safe. I'm here. I'm in my house. Nobody's here. The door's locked. But that doesn't mean you actually feel safe. So it's like your thinking can fool you into thinking, oh yeah, I'm safe. But your body's saying, not safe. I need to run. I need to hide. And so it's like, what is your body telling you, and what's happening for you that that's what you're feeling, even though you think it doesn't match what you should be feeling?
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I think that's part of where the power of working with horses, at least for me, seeing it daily, so profound, because we, I think, have taught ourselves in a variety of ways to override what our body is telling us, right? Like we use the neocortex and the cognitive thinking parts of our brain to say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Or, we put on a brave face, or we tell people we're okay when we're not, and
push through. Yeah,
we push through, and we try to survive. And when you're in the pasture with the horse, or when you're in a round pen with the horse doesn't understand non-congruency. I mean, they don't get that. They don't live in that world. They live in the present. And so they will react to non-congruency in a way that doesn't necessarily build healthy relationships. And so it is very powerful, I think, for people who engage with horses, who are used to being able to say, no, I'm fine, or to say, I'm not scared, but, you can see it in their body. Everything is tense, or their shoulders are tense, or their jaws are clenched. And, the horse will, in a variety of different ways, they'll let them know, right, within the context of the relationship that they're trying to build. And that is so powerful. And I think that is, some of the work that's being done with somatic experiencing and sensory motor psychotherapy, really helping clients key in, right, to like what is happening in your body right now. Because a horse helps you stay in your felt sense, which can be really uncomfortable too, right?
Right, because for many people, being in their bodies hasn't been safe, whether because of overwhelming anxiety that they feel because of a trauma history, or even if their bodies were, abused when they were children, then feeling what your body sensations are, which is that your body's reliving that trauma often. It doesn't feel safe to be in the here and now. It feels safer to be disconnected, but it's really an illusion that it's safer, because, you're really unable to protect yourself, because you really don't actually know what you're feeling or what's happening around you. Your felt sense that's there to give you information is like inaccessible to you.
Yeah. And, I think that, the horse and the therapist at the same time are so important with that, because, the horse is going to ask you to be present, and it's a therapist's responsibility, I think, to be able to track where clients are in their bodies and when it's too much, right? We obviously don't want to re-traumatize anyone or cause them to go over a threshold. And that's where we really, I think with natural lifemanship, use a lot of bottom-up regulation techniques and being able to help clients in any way that they can kind of stay grounded, and to know when they're not grounded. And, sometimes we'll put clients on horses to help them regulate. but there are so many nuances and, just it's very intricate and it takes a lot of knowledge, and that's something I'm still learning. So we say something that I think is really important, that we don't want the horse to just become a very expensive rocking chair, to help clients regulate. It really comes back to the connection and to the relationship. But understanding when clients are over threshold is important with this work because it is so embodied.
Running a group private practice has been a challenging and rewarding experience, and one thing that has made it so much easier is TherapyNotes. TherapyNotes makes billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth incredibly easy. If you're coming from another EHR, like I did, TherapyNotes makes the transition incredibly easy, importing your demographic data free of charge so you can get going right away. My team has found TherapyNotes very easy to learn. It's intuitive. The customer support is second to none. And that's one of the things that has kept me a TherapyNotes customer for several years now. Anytime I've needed to contact TherapyNotes for help with an issue I couldn't figure out on my own, I've been able to get through to someone and resolve the issue within 15 minutes, 99% of the time. Find out what more than 100,000 mental health professionals already know. Try TherapyNotes for 2 months, absolutely free. Just click on the link in the show notes or enter the promo code CHAT at therapynotes.com.
Yeah, and with any trauma work, of course, and and that's what I think you said, the therapist has a responsibility to be tracking how clients doing, and I'll add, in all trauma work, the therapist has a responsibility to be tracking how they're doing too.
Yes,
because that's a part of the process, and how regulated you are is mirrored with your client, and how regulated they are is mirrored with you, and how regulated the horse is. It's all these mirror neurons,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up. I feel like that is so important. And I was sharing this with you before, but when I first started this work with the horses, I felt so exposed and vulnerable and just very raw, because the work does require you to be embodied all the time. Right. And I think that's, and it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to be that in tune. I mean, the horses really ask that of you, and we work in teams, which I think is really beneficial, because if there are days when, somebody is more dysregulated, a therapist is more dysregulated, or, feeling something, we can communicate with each other, and, that's part of the process. And it's very real. I mean, it's very, very real. I think that there's a felt sense of being present in my body in ways that I had not experienced working in an office, with kids or adults. It feels very different.
Yeah. I don't work, in my practice, I don't work with horses, as not as often as I want to. And I'm not doing EAP yet, but so I am in an office. But, for all of us who are doing trauma therapy, it's important to be embodied and present in your body. But no matter what your setting is, and I think being outside, you have a lot of opportunities for grounding. And but I really like what you said about how the working in a team means that when you're dysregulated, someone else is there to help you, and you're there to help them. And I mean, that too seems to parallel what you're doing with the horses and with clients. But I think that's so trauma informed.
It is. I agree with you. I think that it is very trauma informed. And I think, we have a lot of conversations regularly about, how is this work impacting us, and how are we doing our own work? How are we connecting with the horses when we have free time? It is, I think there are so many parallel processes that play out, and being aware of them is really important, like with all trauma work. But yes, the teamwork is, it's the first time that I've done therapy in a team setting, and there's a lot to learn, but it feels incredibly supportive. So, and there's always one person who, has horse experience and knows the horses. And there's one person that is designated as a lead clinician. it feels, it feels necessary for this work because there's so many moving parts.
Yeah. And it means if you need to take care of yourself, there's space for that, which,
yes,
I mean, that's not necessarily the typical mental health practice paradigm.
Right. I mean, and I have to tell you, I mean, and I tell everybody this, but I am so passionate about this work and this model. I think that, when I go into work and I have the space to be able to sit with a herd of 30 horses for even just 15 minutes, right? I mean, it really does turn, I think, kind of mental health practice and agency practice on its head a little bit, because we're asked to take care of ourselves. And that's pretty profound.
Yeah. And because in general, in our educational training programs for social work, counseling, psychology, marriage and family therapy, I don't think it's really, there may be an emphasis on self-care, but I often feel like it can almost be shaming. It's like, you should be doing self-care. And it's like, when would I be doing that? Because, in my agency, I have to see 12 clients in a day and the sessions are like 5 minutes apart. So I do have a chance to go to the bathroom occasionally. But
in my last field placement, I was working with kids, and my experience was, back-to-back sessions. And if I wanted to use the bathroom, then I could, but I would be late to sessions. And I loved my work there and I learned so much, but I wanted to envision something different for my life and my work to sustain me. And I think that I couldn't imagine doing this work without the horses. For me personally, just where I am in my own career development and my own, my own trauma processing, like this felt right. And I was motivated to make that happen, which is an understatement.
Yeah. So awesome. So I do want to ask two more things. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I guess one is kind of more of not a question, but you and I met at a retreat held by the wonderful Rebecca Wong in New York. And it was an equine retreat. And I really hadn't been around horses much at all. And you were much more experienced with horses. But something you said really struck me when you mentioned that how important consent is, which it is. Consent is like everything in any relationship. And when you said something about, I'm just not clear about consent, with this horse, like, you were kind of trying to ask within the framework of what we were doing, like, how do we make sure that the horse is consenting to us touching them?
Sure.
And, that resonated so much for me because I work with survivors of sexual violence. I've done that work for now almost 16 years. And I felt the same way in the group. I had that same question. Where's the consent with this? How does that work in this environment and this type of interaction with this horse? And it was something that I really, I guess, again, what really made me understand how natural lifemanship is really special. So I just wanted to see if you could say a little more about consent and the interaction with the horses and, why that's so important. I mean, it's like almost like we know why it's important, but still.
Right. Yeah. I'm happy you brought that up. I think that this is a conversation that is constantly in process. And yes, I think that, I don't have training in the other forms of equine assisted therapy or learning, so I can't comment on those particular practices, but I think that natural lifemanship does a really good job at bringing up this idea of consent and control into the conversation. I think that, when we ask for connection or for to be in relationship with anyone, then there obviously needs to be consent. And when we use horses, I think that we have to acknowledge that we do have power, right? When we take a horse from the field and put them into a round pen, I mean, there is power there. And just like when we talk about being a clinician and the power that we have in a therapeutic relationship with clients, it's in the room, right? And we bring our identities into the room, we bring that into the space. So I think that we try really hard to be mindful of what that looks like. And sometimes we do work with horses that are, in the field, but, where's the choice, right? And I think that Natural Lifemanship does a beautiful job at making aware kind of relationship patterns where choice hasn't been an option, and definitely brings that into the forefront. And I think that we, in my work, are continuing that conversation of how can we get even better at looking at kind of some of the ethical nature of involving horses in relationships where, who knows, maybe some horses don't want to have relationships with certain clients. Maybe it's not a good fit. Maybe some horses are tired on a certain day and don't want to be in the round pen. So I don't have a good concrete answer, except for that it's a conversation that needs to continue to happen. I think with anyone that uses horses in therapy settings, what I will say is that when the work is done really responsibly, you see horses really willing and eager to develop deep relationships with clients. And you don't see it being something that sours them or makes them feel really, really drained at the end of the day. I think when the work is done responsibly, it's really beautiful to see. But yeah, that conversation of consent is one that I think we will keep having. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was a beautiful answer. And, there's no simple answer there. It's,
right.
It's an animal that, if they really had their own choice, they wouldn't be living in barns and, they wouldn't
right.
be on farms and stuff. They would be in the wild. But
sure.
So there's a limitation on how much consent they can have in our current culture. But the ethical aspect, just because it's complicated doesn't mean you don't consider it,
Right, exactly. Just like any power dynamic in relationships, if we ignore it, then the power goes unchecked, and I think that's where things start to get they can start to get dangerous, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So that was the other part I wanted to ask you about is when you say that natural lifemanship is principle based, can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So natural lifemanship talks a lot about applying principles that are universal. So they use horse psychology, and anything that they apply to the horse, they would like it to also be able to equally apply to clients. So the nice thing about that is that I've found personally in my own experience, I can bring in other forms of training that I have into this work. So I can use the horse psychology. I can use that relational piece, the piece about connection. And then I can also use the trainings that I've done. And I think that the model fits so well with so many of the other, brain-based, bottom-up, trauma-informed regulation pieces that it just clicks. It clicks well. And I like that because a lot of horse work, as I said before, I think tends to veer towards the side of dominance and control, even when we don't want to really acknowledge that. I think the horse world, which I've been in my whole life, it can have that feel to it. So
I think people just think that's how it is and that's what you do, and they just don't have the real thought of the horse as a true sentient being. And, they just don't, it's not that it's just not the mindset because it's not,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that,
it's not intended to do harm. It's just thought that that's how things are.
Right. And I think we need to challenge that, when we say, horses aren't capable of, being able to control themselves. And I think what natural lifemanship says is, would you ever say that about a client, or would there be the expectation that eventually we're going to support this client in being able to self-regulate? And I think this model believes that with time and with experience, and we talk a lot about repetitive, patterned experiences, and we can think for ourselves. We can act in the best interest of our relationships. So that's principle based. And then, like I said before, being able to bring in all of the other pieces of, I think, who I am as a person and as a clinician, and all my previous training fits really really well with this model.
That's awesome. I thank you so much, Julia, for being on Therapy Chat today. I think that people who are listening to this are going to really resonate with what you talked about, and how, what it's like to be a new clinician, doing this really beautiful, powerful work. And, I think people will be able to see themselves in either as a potential client or as a therapist, who may want to go in that direction, that you just explained in such a clear way how this is for you. And I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm very grateful to be able to share. I love this work so much. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you to TherapyNotes for sponsoring this week's episode. I do love TherapyNotes. It's such an asset to my business and makes my job as a practice owner and a therapist much easier. Try it today with no strings attached and see why everyone is switching to TherapyNotes, now featuring ePrescribe. Use coupon code CHAT or click the link in the show notes to get 2 free months at therapynotes.com.
Thank you for listening to Therapy Chat with your host, Laura Reagan, LCSWC. For more information, please visit therapychatpodcast.com.